a perfectly manicured lawn, and a freshly painted fence. These were the hallmarks of a good neighbor. But what if a good neighbor's actions, a simple act of caring for a stray cat, could unleash a torrent of bureaucratic rage? What if the same people who praised your pristine property were now threatening to bulldoze it? It started with a warning, then came the fine, and before I knew it, my entire home was deemed an unauthorized structure. They said I'd broken every rule in the book. But the truth was, they had no idea who they were dealing with. It wasn't a mansion, but it was our home. A simple two-story house on a quiet cul-de-sac, nestled in the kind of neighborhood where kids played ball in the street and neighbors waved from their porches. For years, this was our sanctuary. We'd spent countless weekends turning the backyard into a peaceful retreat, a place where the dog could roam freely and the garden bloomed with vibrant colors. Life here was predictable, comfortable, blissfully uneventful. The HOA was a distant, benign presence, collecting dues and occasionally sending a polite newsletter. We thought we were good citizens, minding our own business and keeping our property pristine. The unwritten neighborhood code was simple: respect each other, keep your lawn tidy, and everything would be fine. We had no reason to believe that. A harmless act of kindness, a decision made with the best of intentions, would be the very thing to tear that peace apart. The first sign came not as a knock on the door, but as an official-looking envelope slipped into the mailbox, its crisp, white paper carrying a weight far heavier than its contents. That's when we realized our quiet life was about to become anything but. That neatly typed letter was the first crack in the foundation of our peaceful life. It arrived in the mailbox, looking so innocent, yet its words felt like a physical blow. A violation, it declared, of the community aesthetic standards. Offense. A tiny, smiling garden gnome nestled among the hydrangeas by the front door. We laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. We sent a polite, email-fueled response, explaining the gnome was a decorative trinket, a harmless piece of yard. Their reply was not a joke. It was a cold, terse, and official-looking document citing Article 3, Section 7 of the HOA bylaws, unauthorized and non-conforming ornamental fixtures. We were fined $250. It was petty. It was absurd. It was also the first in a relentless cascade of penalties that would turn our sanctuary into a war zone. The HOA's president, a man named Mr. Harrington, seemed to take our defiance as a personal insult. He was a creature of absolute order, a man whose lawn was a perfectly manicured carpet and whose life, we soon discovered, was run with the same ruthless precision. Our home became his obsession. The fines came weekly now. They were never about major violations. They were about a single misplaced recycling bin, a leaf that had dared to land on the walkway, and a shade of roof shingle that upon a forensic-level inspection was deemed one shade too dark. The notices were relentless, each one a new and creative way to bleed us dry. We'd contest a fine with photographic evidence and detailed rebuttals, only to be met with a new, even more outrageous fee for frivolous use of management resources. The absurdity was maddening. It felt less like a bureaucracy and more like a cruel game of cat and mouse, with Mr. Harrington the cat and our family the helpless, cornered mice. Our neighbors, once friendly and open, began to keep their distance. We saw the quick glances, the hurried waves, and the way they would suddenly find a reason to water their lawn or check their mail just as we stepped outside. We were a cautionary tale in motion, a living example of what happened when you stood up to the power of the HOA. The isolation was a new kind of pain. It wasn't just our home they were attacking. It was our place in the community. The stress became a physical presence in the house. Every time a car slowed down outside, we'd hold our breath. Every time the mail truck arrived, our stomachs would tighten. We were living on the defensive, meticulously documenting every blade of grass, hiding anything that could be considered unauthorized and constantly walking on eggshells. The joy of home ownership had been replaced by a gnawing anxiety. Then came the final, devastating blow. A certified letter arrived, thick and ominous, its contents a final declaration of war. The fines had ballooned from an annoyance into an astronomical, crippling figure. They were now threatening a lien against our home, a home we had worked for years to own, a home they now claimed to have the right to seize. It was a bluff. We told ourselves, a terrifying power play. But buried deep within the fine print of the HOA bylaws we were forced to reread was a legal gray area, a loophole that gave them the authority to do exactly what they were threatening. They weren't just fining us anymore. They were trying to take our home. The fear gave way to a cold, hard anger. This wasn't a dispute we could win with reason or polite conversation. This was a war against an unfeeling, unyielding enemy who was using a twisted legal framework to destroy us. The time for being a victim was over. We had to fight back, but we couldn't do it the way they expected. We couldn't fight on their terms, on their battlefield. We had to find a different way to take them down. And as we sat there, surrounded by the mounting pile of official notices and legal threats, a single thought took root. We needed to find their weakness. We needed to find the one thing they were hiding. And in our search for a way out, we were about to uncover a secret that would not only save our home, but expose the HOA for the fraud they truly were. The lien notice wasn't a bluff. It was a clear, cold declaration of intent. We had 2 weeks to pay the absurd, inflated fines, or the HOA would begin the legal process of foreclosing on our home. That's when the fear finally broke, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. We weren't going to beg. We were going to fight. We spent the next week in a whirlwind of research. We weren't just reading the HOA bylaws, we were dissecting them. We were looking for a way out, a forgotten clause, a hidden contradiction. We found it in a dusty, neglected section of the community's original charter, a document that predated Mr. Harrington's reign. The bylaws stated that all board members were required to be full-time, primary residents of the community. It seemed simple enough, but a hunch, born from the depths of our frustration, led us to dig deeper into Mr. Harrington's past. The first clue was a property record. Mr. Harrington owned another home, a sprawling estate on the other side of the state. We dismissed it at first. People owned vacation homes. But then we found another detail, a utility bill for his home in our neighborhood that was suspiciously low for a full-time resident. We hired a private investigator, a desperate last-ditch effort, and what they uncovered wasn't a secret. It was a bombshell. Mr. Harrington wasn't a full-time resident. He was an absentee landlord, a man who lived in a different city and only came to our neighborhood for board meetings and to wield his power. He had broken the very rule that gave him the authority to enforce all the others. His reign was a sham. The final confrontation was at the annual community meeting, a sterile, fluorescent-lit room in the local community center. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Neighbors who had once been friendly now sat in stony silence, staring at their hands. Mr. Harrington, seated at the head of the table, was a picture of smug authority, a wolf in a well-tailored suit. He ran down his list of achievements, his voice oozing with self-importance. Then he got to the final order of business, the lien on our home. He presented our case with cold, detached precision, laying out our supposed violations as if they were undeniable facts. He presented the astronomical fines and the legal justification for the lien. He made it sound like a simple, unfortunate necessity. The room remained silent. No one dared to speak up. Our entire future was being decided, in a room full of people who were too scared to defend us. But this wasn't just a meeting for them. It was our stage. My spouse stood up, not to beg, but to confront. They didn't shout or plead. They spoke with a quiet, unshakable confidence that stunned the room into a deeper silence. They didn't defend the fines, or the gnome, or the garden. Instead, they held up a document. "We have reviewed the bylaws," my spouse began, "and it is clear that all board members must be full-time, primary residents of this community. A requirement, Mr. Harrington, that you have not met." A ripple went through the room. Mr. Harrington's smug smile evaporated, replaced by a flash of panic. He tried to interrupt, to dismiss the claim, but my spouse continued, their voice clear and resolute. They laid out the evidence, the utility, bills, the property records, and the sworn affidavit from the private investigator. They presented the indisputable proof that for years, Mr. Harrington had been living in a different county, collecting our dues and imposing his will illegally. The silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Harrington's face turned a shade of sickly white. The other board members looked at him with a mixture of shock and betrayal. His meticulously constructed facade of authority was crumbling before everyone's eyes. He had used his position to terrorize us, to enforce rules he himself was breaking. He was a fraud. The room erupted. The quiet neighbors, once afraid to speak, now found their voices. The dam of fear and frustration had broken. They weren't just angry for us. They were angry for all the petty fines and unfair rules they'd suffered, in silence. In that single explosive moment, Mr. Harrington's power was gone. He stood up, not to argue, but to retreat. A defeated man surrounded by the people he had wronged. He was forced to resign on the spot. All the fines he had levied, including the lien on our home, were declared void. We had not only saved our home, we had exposed a fraud and reclaimed our community from a tyrant. But as we walked out of that meeting with a sense of dizzying triumph, we knew our story wasn't over. This was just the beginning of a reckoning, and it would leave an indelible mark on our neighborhood. The triumph we felt leaving that chaotic community meeting was a kind of dizzying, disorienting joy. The silence that had once suffocated the room was now replaced by the excited chatter of our neighbors. They weren't just relieved for us. They were emboldened. The fear Mr. Harrington had instilled for so long was finally broken. His reign was over, and with it, the era of petty, tyrannical rule. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind. The lien on our home was officially rescinded. The management company, disgraced and caught in a clear violation of their own contract, severed ties with the HOA. Mr. Harrington and his allies on the board were gone, a public humiliation that resonated far beyond our cul-de-sac. For the first time in a long time, we were able to breathe a sigh of relief. The constant, gnawing anxiety that had become a part of our daily lives simply vanished. Our home was no longer a fortress to be defended, but a sanctuary once again. But the story didn't end there. The long-term consequences of our stand were far-reaching, rippling through the entire community. Our neighbors, once silent and scared, began to speak up. They demanded a new board, one that was transparent and fair. They wanted to review every rule, to dismantle the archaic and absurd regulations that had made life so difficult. We, in a way, had become the catalysts for a revolution. We didn't seek power, but in our fight for justice, we had stumbled into a leadership role. The community, in a landslide vote, elected a new board of directors, one with a mandate to reform the entire system. The unapproved garden gnome was the first thing to be officially declared safe. It was a small gesture, but it symbolized a massive shift. The new board worked to simplify the bylaws, removing vague and unenforceable rules. They created a clear, open process for resident feedback. The weekly inspections, the anonymous reports, the constant sense of being watched, all of it came to an end. We began to see more vibrant gardens, more personalized mailboxes, and most importantly, more open and friendly faces. The community, once divided by fear, was now united by a shared sense of victory and a renewed spirit of cooperation. Our home, which had been at the center of the storm, became a symbol of resistance. People would stop by, not to stare, but to thank us. We had shown them that a single person, armed with the truth, could take on a powerful system and win. We learned a profound lesson, that true power doesn't lie in controlling others, but in the courage to stand up for what is.
Right.
It's a lesson that changed not only our lives, but the very fabric of our neighborhood. Our battle wasn't just about a garden gnome or a list of fines. It was about the fundamental right to enjoy your home without fear, to live in a community where rules serve to protect, not to punish. It was a story that started with a simple act of kindness and ended with the toppling of a tyrant. Our victory, however, was a shared one. It was a reminder that while one person can light a spark, it takes a whole community to start a fire.